Test.
Right. So
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Accountability, Performance and Finance Committee meeting of Monday, the 2nd of September 2024. Ina mana, ina reo, ina karangatanga maha, tēnā koutou. In terms of health and safety, if the alarm sounds, please make your way to the nearest emergency exit. The assembly point is across the road from this building. Please be aware that this meeting is being live streamed and the video will be publicly available on YouTube. Members, could you please remember to speak clearly into your microphones and only one speaker at a time for clarity. And I welcome all the members, all the elected members here today in this committee and those who are observing today. Please turn off your mobile phones, including mine. And I'm going to ask Coral to do the opening karakia for us this morning. Thank you, Coral.
Kia ora. Tuakira te moana nei, I papaki ko ana ki te ako tangata.
Ta kinga waka, ka muri titi tohu, ki te ari nā umawao. Hi pau herenga mau, hi pau honganga mau, ki herea ki te tika, ki herea ki te pono, ki mau ki I, ita ki U, humi e, hui e, tā ki e. Kia ora. Kia ora.
I have an apology from Councillor Mackay Sydney, who has been granted a leave of absence. Are there any other apologies? Being that we're all here, I don't think there are. Can I call for a mover and seconder to accept the apologies? No. Thank you, Martin. Sorry, thank you, Councillor Roseburn. And seconded by, thank you, Councillor Kurak. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Thank you. Declare the motion carried. I'm reporting that there is no public forum. How I say it? Are there any late items for business? That being the case, there are no late items for business. I've got no confidential business to be transferred into the open. I've got no changes to the order of business. Can I call for any declarations of conflict of interest? There being none, report there are no conflicts of interest. So we'll move to the first item, 8.1, the outline work program for the Accountability, Performance and Finance Committee for the 24-25 financial year. Paul Davidson, Chief Financial Officer, will be speaking to this report. Over to Paul, and any questions from council members, committee members.
Morning, Deputy Mayor, Mayor and councillors. The first paper is the work program proposed for the Accountability, Performance and Finance Committee for the year. It's really based on the scope document, and welcome the committee's input to this document. And what I would say is we'll treat this as a live document as well, so that if things come up throughout the year, then we'll amend the work program for it. So just to give a high level overview of it, we've broken it down between the annual plan and long-term plan. So that's looking at the financial elements to come to this committee. So obviously the council will approve any changes to rating structure, but any more technical and detailed conversations, we're looking at bringing those to the committee in November, and then work through the annual plan, long-term plan program for there. Finance and Treasury is the next element. So the Treasury policy and strategy will come through to this committee. On today's agenda, we have an overview of the Treasury strategy, and then there's a number of resolutions that we'll seek from the committee to implement that in the October meeting. We'll also offer our Treasury advisors, Bancorp, to come to future meetings to give an overview of the Treasury policy and strategy, and also the Standard & Poor's credit rating, which we're due to receive around October, November this year. In terms of performance, we have the performance KPIs and setting. We'll bring to the next committee meeting what are currently set through our statutory and other documents. So that will be through action and investment plans, long-term plan, and then seek the committee's input as to the setting of those measures and baselining going forward. CCOs, we have the Local Government Funding Agency coming to this committee, and on today's agenda we have the statement of intent. The other CCOs going to the full council meeting, and then we have the Chief Executive KPI process coming to this committee. Also the annual report, which is a very early item on this today's agenda, which is the first draft of some of the report, with the main draft report coming to this committee at the next October meeting. Statutorily, we're required to adopt that by full council by the end of October, so that will come into this committee at the next meeting, but we've brought some initial items of it for feedback at this point. I'll take any questions.
Thank you, Paul. Any questions of Paul or the staff? I can start. So just in terms of the, I like your note that we are talking about it being a a live work program, and we will propose that we are able to amend it over time and report it back to this committee. One of the things I did notice and this was something where I'd like a distinction between when we talk about financial and non-financial performance. I don't think they should be grouped. I think we should talk about non-financials as a very separate group of work. And when we look at on the TCC website, it says the role of council, and there's bullet points. I'm going to read out the first three. The first is development and adoption of policies, which I think is done by full council. And then there's the monitoring the performance of the council against its stated objectives and policies. And I would have thought that that's a performance activity which would come back to this committee. The third one is prudent stewardship of council resources. Again, we would like that to be part of the work plan. And I do note at the end of the next bullet point for the employment and appraisal of the CEO, it's also monitoring the implementation of policy by him or her. So again, that's an additional performance measure. And those, I think, are things that we would expect to come back to this committee and be in the work plan. Any other questions of the work plan? Okay, thank you, Paul. That being the case, can I have a mover and a seconder for the recommendation as set out in the report? Thank you, Councillor Crowther. Seconder, thank you, Councillor Roseboom. Can I ask the mover to speak on the motion?
I haven't really got anything to add. I'm just happy to support it through, and with the comments that the chair made, I think that's a very helpful contribution, and I think it's important we get that information clearly laid out for ourselves and for the public.
Thank you, Councillor Crowther. From my perspective, I'd just like to foreshadow that I would like that an amended C on the recommendation about changes to the work plan able to be made and reported back to this committee. At the right place.
Madam Chair, I'm happy to move that amendment if
Thank you,
something you
Councillor
would like to
Correct.
achieve. Just that it is fluid and we can make recommendations in terms of the work program.
Okay, so we've got a Councillor Crowther, are you happy? And Councillor Roseboom, are you happy to just add this into the motion?
Yes,
Right,
very happy
thank
for
you.
that.
Okay. So any further debate on this now motion?
I think it's a good addition because as elected members, as we progress through the financial year or through our 4-year term, we'll have probably some ideas in terms of adjusting what comes to this committee and just not leave it up to the organisation to determine some of these issues.
Thank you, Councillor Correct. The debate's now finished. I now put the following motion to be voted on. That the Accountability Performance and Finance Committee, that the Accountability Performance and Finance Committee receives the report outline work program for Accountability Performance and Finance Committee for the 24-25 financial year. Notes the outline work program for the committee as per attachment 1 of this report. That this work plan may be amended and those amendments will be reported back to this committee. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. We are now going to 8.2, the 6-monthly Treasury strategy update. Again, Paul Davidson, Chief Financial Officer, and Cherie Coville, Treasury and Financial Compliance Manager, will be speaking to this report. Over to you.
Thank you. Just while Cherie's coming forward. So the Treasury strategy is something we bring to committee every 6 months. We're bringing this paper in the first instance to this committee this month in terms of outlining what is included within the Treasury strategy. Next month, we will also bring a number of resolutions that are required just to implement it around our hedging policies and where some of our maturities and so forth. So this is very much an information paper for any questions that the committee might have. Catherine Sharpland, our finance manager, is also, our manager of finance, is also here.
Welcome, Catherine.
So I'll hand over to Cherie.
Good morning. Thanks, Paul, for the introduction. Stole my first line. So we're a small team in the Treasury function. We manage the day-to-day operations, which is made quite simple with all of our borrowing through the LGFA. We have a monthly formal update with our advisors, Bancorp, that generally covers an economic and market update, review of TCC's debt and hedging positions, and we also agree strategies for upcoming borrowing and hedging arrangements. As Paul said, we've arranged for Bancorp to come and meet with this committee and present in November. So the Treasury strategy, like Paul said, is brought every 6 months, covering half-year and full-year results of the Treasury function. This particular report covers the full-year results to 30th of June 2024. I thought that given the time since June and now, it might be helpful to provide a few updates on some of the metrics in this report. And it's also my understanding that we're going to bring a formal report in October, which I can give a quarter-end update as well. So the report shows that at year-end, we had $1.17 billion worth of gross debt. Since then, we've issued a further $100 million through the LGFA. That brings our gross debt to $1.27 billion. We don't anticipate having to borrow any further money for the next couple of months because we've got the first instalment of rates, which had our bank account, most of it on Friday. I checked last night and it appears that our net debt will be around $1 billion now with that kind of $120 million worth of rates revenue that's hit. So what we do at this time of year when we've got a lot of cash is we put that on short-term deposit to match our cash flows for the next couple of months, mainly any property settlements coming up or our 20th of the month contract payments. We've also executed $80 million worth of swaps since the 30th of June. So if you refer to paragraph 30 and then the graph on the following page, this shows our fixed debt profile against our Treasury policy band minimum and maximums. So since we've executed the $80 million worth of swaps, that's brought that grey line in the near term much closer, if not on the midpoint. And in the longer term, it's brought it right up above that blue line. We are still conscious of the level of hedging that we have in place, and we work with Bancorp really closely on that, just given the unknown around waters reform and what the divestment of any waters debt could mean with the hedging profile. So we monitor that very closely. That's all the updates that I have, but I'm happy to take any questions. And Catherine, who's closely engaged with the Treasury operations as well, we can answer between us.
Thank you. That was a good update. Any questions from elected members? Thank you, Mayor Mahe.
I'm just interested around the your sort of fixed rate policy and how you kind of get there. Is it just a stepped approach, or are you looking for opportunities where we are in the economic cycle and that sort of thing?
Like I said, we've been very conscious about waters reform and what that means with our hedging profile. So we do put calls with the main banks for when certain forward start swaps with a certain maturity will hit a certain number, and we agree that with Bancorp as to whether it's appropriate to add more swaps when it's hitting a certain number. But we have been for the last year or so trying to keep at least the long-term stuff down quite close to the minimums.
Very supplementary to that. So obviously we're in an interest rate decreasing cycle right now. So would you look to be looking at some of that longer term debt, fixing that out a bit longer once interest rates fall?
Yes, so we've been starting to target longer term maturities with the LGFA and also with some forward start swaps. The LGFA offer out to 2037 now. And as those rates start to come down, we're going to look to issue longer term debt.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cherie. Any other questions?
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question in terms of the comment in paragraph 40, in terms of the impacts on credit ratings of the higher debt limit. When do staff think you'll have information for us about that?
If I can answer that, we are having some work done at the moment in terms of what shadow ratings would look like in the event of waters, which we would expect to receive in the next month. I think it's fair to say that you never get the full information until you actually get a rating in place. So it won't be definitive, but it will give us an indication.
Thank you, Paul. Questions of staff have finished. I now call for a mover and seconder of the recommendations as set out in this report. A mover, thank you, Councillor Crowther. Seconder, thank you, Councillor Kurek. Did you want to speak to the motion, Councillor Kurek? Or no? Okay, no. I open the motion for debate. Mahe?
Yeah, I think we're just as per the comments, we just need to update the Treasury policy around changing the committee to this committee. Obviously, everything's referred to at the moment as the Audit, Risk and Finance Committee, so that just needs to be updated.
That being noted, all those in favour, the recommendation that the Accountability, Performance and Finance Committee receives the report 6 monthly Treasury strategy update. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Now moving to 8.3, the 2023-24 Interim Audit Report from Audit New Zealand. Again, we've got Paul Davidson, Chief Financial Officer, and Cherie Coville, Treasury and Financial Compliance Manager, speaking to this report. Welcome again, Cherie.
So you get sick of us today. Just the audit report from Audit New Zealand. So Audit New Zealand prepare an audit report as part of the planning process of the long-term plan as well as the annual report. This is the interim report from Audit New Zealand. They will also prepare a final audit report. It coming to this committee, given that the Audit and Risk Committee doesn't meet until afterward the planned adoption date for the annual report for this year. This report includes all of the items either from the current audit that's being undertaken or previous audits. It's fair to say that there are a number of outstanding items from previous audits that audit have indicated that they still haven't done the work to sign off, and that will be concluded as part of the final audit. The other thing that I would say is that not all of the recommendations we always fully implement. We work with Audit New Zealand to get the right outcome of that in terms of a practical solution to some of those suggestions that they have. So unless Cherie's got anything to add, I'll just take questions.
Thank you, Paul. Any questions for staff?
Just a quick question on monitoring of B card usage. The comment that they'll follow up on this issue at the final audit, but I'm just trying to, is that just basically an honesty system that the staff get given a B card and you just need some test of that somehow? I'm just not sure how you can monitor it in terms of for private usage.
That's a good example of what we work with and practically come up to a solution, because yes, with staff are given a B card, it's almost impossible to monitor the exact use of it. We do monitoring of where people are given them and they're not using them, for example, and bring those back. But we won't, we won't be able to fully monitor every use of B cards.
Just in terms of those outstanding open recommendations, I like your comment, and I'd like you to follow up with Audit New Zealand just in terms of being able to close some of those down. It seems, if they're not major, back to 2019 seems a long way not to have just been closing those down. The only other comment in section 3 just says the finance team provided us with documents and information requested on a timely basis and generally by the due date set. I wondered, is there any background to that report, including that item?
I don't know any specifics, but there are times where, for various reasons, that we work closely with audit to get to the final close-off date. But the timetables we work to do have some flex in them as we work through programs. It can be, for example, there are a number of technical accounting issues that might need to be worked through that actually impact on the timing of when information could be provided. They may request that we get external accounting advice. They may go to Wellington for more further technical accounting advice. So that may vary when things are actually provided. That may not agree to the initial timeline that's set. But we do look to the key date we focus on is a statutory compliance deadline, which is 4 months after the end of year, 3 months for CCOs in terms of signing off accounts.
Thank you, Paul. I've got one other question on section 4, upcoming elections for council. Council staff will need to have an effective induction and training program available for incoming councillors. Is that going to be something that is measured and reported back on, the effectiveness of that induction program?
We certainly have an induction program that's available, which some parts we've implemented and some are still available for council to work through. In terms of the measuring the effectiveness, I don't think we've got anything formally in place to track it, but would welcome feedback from councillors in terms of any information or support that's required in that.
Thank you. I think we should have some feedback on that just to make sure we are ensuring we're learning from how we go. So those are my questions. Any other questions? Thank you, Mayor Mahe.
Sorry, probably taking one of your questions, but there is saying, the first step of performance reporting is finding out what the audience wants. In regards to our annual report, have we asked the Tauranga people what we want? Or what they want, sorry?
So the annual report effectively will report back on what is set through either a long-term plan or an annual plan. So through the consultation process for those documents effectively is setting the performance measures that's signed off by the council at the time of what those performance measures are. So annual report is really just reporting effectively on what those previous documents signed off, which are consulted documents.
So we haven't had any consultation as to whether there's things that the people would like to see in the annual report and information that potentially is missing or that they feel isn't being covered?
Not specifically, no.
Thank you.
Just as a supplementary on that, and I don't know if this question is also going to be raised in the annual report But it's very important that that feedback is sought if we're going to say that our annual report is readable by the people of Tauranga. We probably do need to find out what they do want to see in the annual report. But I think I'll bring that back to the annual report section as well. So questions of staff have finished. I now call for a mover and seconder of the recommendations as set out in this report. Thank you, Councillor Roseboom. Can I have a seconder? Thank you, Lemire Mahe. Is there any discussion required on this report, on the motion?
No, it's just that I support what's been said about gathering more detail around what the people of Tauranga want us to report back to them on, how the council is performing, especially around their expectations of us and the council in general. That's it.
Thank you, Councillor Roseboom. The debate has finished. I'll now put the following motion to be voted on, that the Accountability, Performance and Finance Committee receives the report 2023-24 interim audit report from Audit New Zealand, notes the recommendations contained within the report to Council by Audit New Zealand, including recommendations from previous audits, notes the management responses and supports the ongoing implementation of improvements as required. All those in favour? Aye. Against? I declare the motion is carried. We now go to 8.4, the Tauranga City Council Draft Annual Report. We've again got Paul and Cherie and adding Josh Logan, Team Leader Corporate Planning. Welcome, Cherie and Josh and Paul.
I'll talk to the financials and then Christine can make comment on some of the other performance measures that we've gathered, including within the annual report. As I mentioned in the work program, this is the unaudited draft financials, and we've also included the groups of activity section in this document, very early form. The intent will be at the 8th of October meeting that the committee will see the full draft annual report for recommendation or otherwise to council for adoption at the end of October. From the financials, I'll just draw the committee's attention to paragraph 12, which outlines the key financial tables. It goes through the capital program for the year, our debt position, point out the operational expenditure line that has exceeded budget. There are three significant reasons for that. One is the accounting treatment of Tauranga West. The other is the treatment of digital services, which traditionally have been treated as capital expenditure. However, in recent years, consistent with other organisations and councils, we've moved to software as a service, which is going through our operational expenditure line, and we'll bring back how we fund that to future committee and council meetings. And the other is the impacts of revaluations, which do tend to impact the depreciation line within the financials. And that's probably the key items to bring to the attention. The debt revenue ratio is sitting at the moment well within the borrowing limit. Two things that is obviously increasing with the size of the capital program moving forward, and that limit is dropping down to 280% in the next 2 years. Christine, do you want to talk to?
I'll speak to the performance measures. So as Paul said before, the performance measures are set through the LTP. So this is the last annual report on the 2021 to 2031 LTP. Measures are a mixture of mandatory measures that are set at a national level that we have no choice on, they have to be included, and then a series of measures that the council of the day chooses that it wants to measure against, and as Paul said, that's consulted through the consultation process. There's a balance between, so obviously there's mandatory measures which has set targets, but then in terms of setting the other targets, there's a balance between setting targets that are achievable, but also that are stretched, so they're just not so easy that you get 100% on them, but actually don't stretch your performance. So that's sort of one of the key considerations when you're setting targets. This report, as I said, is the last one. So through the 2024 to 34 LTP, there was quite a lot of work done on reviewing and updating the performance framework, aligning it with the new strategic direction and the action and investment plans. And we tested that in March of this year just to see whether it was workable so that we could tweak anything before the 2024 LTP was adopted. So sort of last round of the old, this one, and then the new will come in. Just in terms of the performance itself, paragraphs 16 and 17 provide this overall summary in terms of achievement. So 66% achieved, 31% not achieved, and 3 not able to be measured. And then paragraph 17 shows there's been a mixture of some things that were below target trending downwards and some things that were improvements over the performance measures of the year prior. If you've got any specific questions around the measures themselves, they're probably best directed to the relevant general manager. So I'm responsible for coordinating and pulling it together in the framework, but the general managers are responsible for their respective areas of performance.
If I could also just add, that paragraph 14 outlines some of the changes we've made around the disclosures and how we're proposing to treat some changes that have been recommended from previous annual reports. That's detailed in paragraph 14.
Thank you, Paul and Christine. Just a question on the, I guess the consultation around the measures, the performance measures that are being used in the long-term plan. Back in my day when I was just a people of Tauranga, I would probably have said that I couldn't look at the long-term plan and say that that set out specific measures that enabled me to say that Tauranga City Council was performing well or returning value for the rates I paid. So is that one of the questions when you consult, that as a person, as a ratepayer in Tauranga, are you getting value for the rates you're paying, and are you happy with the performance of Tauranga City Council?
I think, to be honest, the average person going about their daily lives, it's probably not something that's on the top of their radar. Generally, people are more interested through the consultation process on particular projects or initiatives. Generally, those that are in their local neighbourhoods are more of interest to them rather than perhaps some of the level of service and more specific targets. But we do draw on feedback that we get from the community through a range of methods, and particularly through the updated ones that you'll see coming from now forward. The consultation that happened through the action and investment plan, where we got quite a lot of feedback from different groups in the community around those action investment plans, that's translated into measures that looks at how effective council is in implementing and giving effect to those action and investment plans.
Can I just on that suggest that the November meeting does include an item on the performance measures and how we might consult on them going forward, and this committee may well come up with some ideas for that in terms of what performance measures we want to start seeing in place that can be reported back in the annual plan and annual report.
Yes, we've got on the work program, we plan to bring all of the measures to you in the October meeting to outline what they were, and then
they're existing ones.
They're existing measures, and then
I'd like to think
feedback into November. Yep, we can do that.
Existing, but they are different from the ones that you're seeing here. So these were the ones that were adopted in the 2021 to 31 LTP. There's a whole new batch that have been created for the 24 to 34 LTP, so they're quite different. So you might want to look at those. You still might want to make some changes, but there was quite a big exercise done because the Commission raised similar questions around the performance framework and wanted quite a lot of improvements and changes. So it was one of their key areas that they looked at. So there's a step change between what you're seeing here, which is still our statutory obligation to report against, which was 2021 ones, to what you'll see from 1 July moving forward, which is the new framework.
Thank you, but we've still got, so are we going to get more detail on the 6 out of the 9 satisfaction measures that were below target?
It's all included in the attachment.
Mahe.
Yeah, thank you. I think yeah, really happy to see those, that paragraph 14, and, this council, I think, is very keen on transparency. So being able to break some of those down and is a really good step forward. So thank you for that. I guess in in going further to that, I just sort of reiterate my point that I made before, that I think we do need to get some feedback from the people of Tauranga around the annual report, and find out whether there is things that we could report easier. I know this is a very big document, and I must say I struggled a wee bit through some of it, and I think there is a sort of some key parts of information that we could make a little bit easier for the people to understand what we're doing. And then my next question, or probably my question, is around these key performance measures. Yeah, sorry, that was a statement. Sorry, around the key performance measures. Is 66% achieved? Is that a good result?
I'll comment on that, and Christine can add to it if she wants to. But I think we'd like to see. We think that number is a good result, reflective of the measures. 100% is a good result, but if the measures are too easy to get there, then it's not a good result. So we try and set the measures that are in somewhat achievable, but still a challenge within there. So I personally don't think 100% is a great result, because it means your measures are probably too easy. But is 60% good? I think that's the detail. Looking at the detail of where those results have either been close or the reasons behind them, and understanding the why is what I would say is to determine as to whether they're a good or a bad result within there.
I would concur, and I think when you look at the particular ones, there'd be some that we'd say we're not satisfied, we're not comfortable with, they need to improve, particularly some of those which are around compliance with statutory timeframes, etc. And then some which perhaps are a bit more stretch, or because of circumstances we haven't been able to get there, and what we need to do is have some good improvement plans so that the next year we're focusing on those and making some stepped improvements.
As supplementary to that, so what do we do? Like something like regulatory compliance, which is obviously missed the mark. How do we go about fixing that or improving that going forward?
Through you, Chair, I think there are two parts to that question, and the first part is some of those KPIs that you can see down in the bulk of the report. The level of service was 100% of dogs registered in Tauranga, which is actually impossible to meet. And whether that's a realistic KPI, we reviewed that for the new set and adjusted those so that it was more realistic, because if it's impossible, someone's dog has puppies and those puppies aren't registered, we'll never be able to achieve that KPI. But there are others, like those statutory timeframes, that are absolutely important. And so when we don't meet those, we are reviewing our processes, reviewing our systems, and making sure that we are improving. And you can see over time that timeliness is getting there, but we're not there yet.
Thank you.
Councillor Currick.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to Paul, you mentioned earlier around the depreciation and its impact on the budgets. So given the large increases in the cost of replacing and renewing assets, and that would have an impact on the depreciation quantum, how do you manage that? Because we've seen such massive increases, and in terms of fitting in other desired services or projects into that operational funding side, is there a balance, or how are you achieving that?
Yep, good question. A number of things. One is, firstly, what I would say is that every dollar of money we're receiving from depreciation funding is a dollar less debt. So that's one thing as part of that consideration. But from an affordability perspective, we bring those options to council as part of an annual plan or long-term plan in terms of, and that includes what the balances of our depreciation reserves would be, to look to achieve a balance effectively from an affordability lens as well as of an asset replacement lens. Because what we don't want to do is, if we don't fund enough of that depreciation, then when we come to renew those assets, it's obviously a bigger impact at that point, but it is a balance of present day affordability effectively of what that looks like, the intergenerational impact of funding it over time. And that's brought to council as part of decisions in terms of setting rates and the funding process in an annual plan or long-term plan.
Further to that, and the financial prudence regulation in terms of assessing affordability, like you mentioned in your response, how does this organisation gauge the affordability of the community in responding to that regulation? And I look at some of the limits on rate increases that were put in place during the long-term plan process, and some of those limits were pretty extraordinary in terms of the capacity if one wanted to fully implement that, the budgets to meet those limits. And I looked at it, I recall, during the election campaign period, if we added up the limits in a cumulative manner, it came out to something like a 262% increase in rates. So that brings that question to the forefront. How does this organisation determine affordability? Have any surveys been done? Because it seems to me that it's a bit out of touch when we look at some of that, the approach to that prudence regulation.
Yeah, what I would say, that there are some affordability measures that are around. What they are largely quite dated. I think some of them come out of the Shand report, for example, at 5% of income. Ultimately, the affordability conversation is part of, again, an annual plan, a long-term plan process in consultation with the community in terms of what the community would seek for the spending by council effectively and what the cost of that is. And that's a balance that we have that conversation every year effectively of what that would look like. But there is no there are quite high level measures of affordability, but the issue with rates and affordability is that it's quite a blunt instrument across a lot of ratepayers, and what might be affordable for some groups isn't affordable for others. The commission, for example, considered the use of differentials and how that might impact on various sectors' affordability. But it really becomes a conversation with the community in annual plan and long-term plan processes.
So further to that, so moving forward, this council over the next 4 years, could we in fact consult with the community to establish more closely or accurately this community's ability to pay in terms of affordability through some sort of process? I mean, I'm thinking outside, or it could be done in conjunction with the annual plan process, but some means to therefore move forward over the next 4-year term, because during that term we will have a LTRP process to go through. But just because during even this initial term, there'll be stuff coming to us. We want an extra, proposals from the community or whatever to add to the rate requirement or debt requirements. So, what would you suggest to me in terms of the process to establish a policy on rates and debt?
So through the chair, my suggestion would be that conversation takes place as we move into annual plan and long-term plans, and we would bring options effectively at that time.
Any other questions? Mayor Mahe.
I've got a number of questions. I'm not sure whether we can discuss some of those now, sort of specific questions about annual report. So yeah, just firstly, if we go to page 73, and this is the supporting community groups and initiatives. If I just use Bay Venues, for example, it'd be interested to see a breakdown of what is operational compared to renewals and capital. Is that all operational?
So just in terms of our CCOs, what we include within this document, which is the group document, is the summary of their performance. They actually produce their own separate annual reports, where a lot of that information will actually be in as well. So we'll bring those to council as well.
Okay.
As part where you will see more detail on the actual Bay Venues, Tourism Bay of Plenty, Art Gallery, etc.
Okay. Right. And then interested, Bay Oval, what that relates to, that increase there.
Bay Oval grant. I'm not sure if Gareth is able to.
I can, so you're talking about the community grants table, that was
Yeah.
attachment 3. Yeah. So the Bay Oval, that's a big capital project that they're delivering, and we're providing grants towards that. The reason that it's quite chunky year on year is just because of the timing that they draw down on those grants. I think that there was expected to be a large payment to them in the 2024 financial year, but they had delays in their construction, so we've carried those funds forward to this financial year.
Okay, thank you.
And if I could just explain briefly on the way we treat those grants from a funding perspective, because we don't, technically they're operational expenditure in our accounts because we're providing a grant to another organisation, but because the benefit is a longer term benefit, we still seek a resolution to pass to debt fund that money, so we don't end up with a big spike in rates occurring each time they're paid out, and to give that intergenerational benefit of that.
Okay, thank you. Now, I'd like to go to the annual report, if possible, page 11. And this is just that debt servicing benchmark. Now, I'm just interested because, it says council's borrowing costs as a proportion of revenue, excluding development contributions, financial contributions, vested assets, gains on derivative, financial instruments, and revaluations of property, plant, and equipment. Now, could we simplify that? Because is that rates, or it seems like it would be quicker to put in what that includes rather than what it doesn't.
So that particular section that you're looking at is the prudence section. So that's a legislatively set definition for the debt to revenue ratio. That's the prudence debt to revenue ratio, which is different to the LGFA debt to revenue ratio. So we can include and exclude different revenue types and net debt off of certain things depending on whether it's a prudence one or a LGFA one or a credit rating one again. You're probably right that the footnote is very long, and we could work on the definition of that, but the quick answer to your question is no, it's not just rates. There's a lot of other operational revenue included in that ratio, which includes operational grants specifically from NZTA, and it also includes like user fees, like building consents, dog registrations, such things like that.
Yeah, I just think we could look at that to make it a bit clearer as to maybe what it does include rather than what it doesn't.
We can bring that back. We'll have a look at which is the shorter list.
Yeah, but it's probably easier if you just tell us what it is rather than what it isn't, because I'm confused there. I don't know what it is. Reading that. Just, oh, why is that not working for me? Now the next one is on page 12. And this sort of leads into a couple of questions, I guess. We've got that that effectively the net debt is lower than budgeted, but then the gross debt is higher. And I'm just interested as to why that is. Obviously we're holding a huge amount of cash or equivalents in that case. So is there a reason for that?
Yes, so the net debt was a lot lower than budgeted because we did hold a lot of cash at year end. 2 years in a row now, we've received significant payments from NZTA and CIP right on the 30th of June. We generally just budget to hold a small amount of cash in term deposit aligned with the Treasury policy. So that brings our net debt down quite significantly when we do get those big inflows right at the end of the year.
Okay, no, that's fine. That makes sense. I was just wondering why we're doing that. Sorry. And then, just another question. Now we're on page 19. And the borrowings being 100 million more than expected. Obviously, that's covered in the note. But can you just explain that simply?
Can I just, because I've got different page numbering to you, would you mind giving me the page number on the actual PDF document?
Sorry.
Oh, yeah, okay.
I'll jump in. Just the question is the debt being higher. There are a number of reasons. There were some property purchases that were undertaken in the year that weren't budgeted for. The property purchase on Cameron Road for the courts was one, for example, the ex-warehouse site, and a number of. Sure, have you got other reasons there? I've just gone blank, but
yes, you also need to add the current and non-current borrowings together, and the budgeted current borrowings were different to the actual current borrowings. So I think if you were to add those together, the difference isn't as significant. But further to Paul's point, we had additional borrowing approved throughout the year for Cameron Road. Did you say that one? Yeah. We also had, I'd have to double check, but I'll pull that up.
Okay, thank you. And sorry, through the chair, we've had, I guess, a large step up in payments to employees. It's a 25% increase in a year. Is there? I'd be interested to understand the reasoning for that.
It'll be a combination. We can. What I suggest is we provide you a more detailed breakdown of it, because it'll be a combination of increased staff numbers, regular paying movements throughout the year. But we can provide that breakdown in more detail.
It's a very significant step up. And then, we've got, I guess, assets here, and we're talking about investments in council controlled CCOs. I know there's a big asset listed there for bay venues. Is that really an asset?
So the equity component is shown as an investment in our accounts. The reason for the increase is that there was an approved increase through commissioners throughout the year to increase the equity of bay venues.
And then just under so we're page 30 or page 259. I want to confirm those figures are correct. Firstly, there's it says the current chief executive was reappointed to the role on the 4th of September 2024. Is that correct?
23.
Well, it says it's 20. Okay, needs to be changed. And the salary there doesn't line up to the list. We've got one employee earning over $600,000 in the table, and then we've got the salary of 537. Can you explain that variance there?
Yeah, this is a reflection of the previous year's earnings, as opposed to what the current contract might be.
Okay, but you've got remuneration band for employees as at 30th of June. So is that forward-looking rather than back-looking?
I'll have to take that away to the financial accounting team and double check it, but and we'll report back on that point specifically at the October meeting to clarify.
Okay, thank you.
My understanding is that's the band at that date. So, but we'll confirm that.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. And then consultants. We seem to have a huge consultants fee, and if you work it out, where once you add in consultants and employees, we're 53% of our rates revenue is being spent on employees and consultants. Can we have a comment on that?
So that number, I'm assuming, will be the total expenditure added up. Not all of the funding will be through rates for those. Some will be capitalised, some will be paid through activities that are user fees funded. So again, we can bring that split back if that would be helpful.
Yeah, it would be. And rates, we've got rates written off, which I'm just, actually assets written off, 12 million. Can we just have a comment on what they may be? Oh, sorry, of the report 262 or 33?
My suggestion is if we can just bring these back to the 8th of October meeting, if that would be helpful in terms of any other questions in terms of breakdowns of the splits, that might, if that would be okay with the committee to do that.
Yeah. And yeah, I'm interested around that, sort of back to that Treasury report, but the total cash and equivalents that we're holding of around about 83 million. That seems high, but I'm interested into the reasoning for that.
That goes back to the previous conversation around the NZTA and CIP grants flowing in on the 30th of June. So we were sitting on about $100 million worth of cash right at the end of the financial year. So 83 of that sits in the cash and cash equivalents, and then the $27 million in other current assets, 20 million of that is also a term deposit.
So the loan again to Bay Venues, is that being paid off, or is that ever going to be recovered?
The answer is yes, it has similar debt repayment requirements as council does in terms of over the life of its assets. And some of the reasons of putting that equity in was to ensure that it actually had a level of equity to be able to actually return money to repay debt over time. So whether it be, and that includes both its income producing assets and its community assets. So it will be a balance of that. But the short answer is it needs to pay its debt over time, as council does.
Yeah, I guess my question is, if we're giving them 13 million, are they just giving us some of that back to repay the debt? In which case, it's potentially not a loan. So then page 44 or 273 of the annual report. This is in regards to Devonport Road. I assume that is the sale of 90 Devonport Road. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And potentially, just like to flag, I'd like to know how they got to that number. Whether that's for now or a later date. So
bring that back.
Now we're 52 or 281 of the report. And I notice I'm interested just around what the additions, this is around the computer software additions of the 15 million relate to.
So the accounting rules have been redefined for how we treat capital expenditure in specific software, particularly software as a service. So the intangibles acquisitions will mainly reflect the huge capital program that we've got sitting around our SAP and bringing on more modules into the SAP. I know that the biggest one we're working on right now is the rates module.
Thank you. Now, just going down to now 112 or 93 of the annual report. This is just around the significant capital projects, and just probably more a comment. What I would love to see here is, for example, Cameron Road Stage 2, that we show the full actual cost when a project is done, and a breakdown of that. Like, I guess we're talking here, about, what is the budget, what is the actual, but it doesn't give you an overall sort of picture of you just see the variance, but it would be good to see, completed projects and that total variance, and how that funding was made up, is again out of transparency. And And then finally, if we go to page 197 on 178, we sort of covered it, but I would like to just make the comment that building consent applications processed within the legal timeframes of 65%. I think this is one of our core businesses. We need houses in the city. We need to improve those dramatically to make our people happy. So that concludes my questions. I'll hand back to the chair.
Thank you, Mayor Mahe. Can I just suggest that that last comment, which is really important about building consents, becomes a question, and it is that we do get reporting of building consents started in process and completed for the last 3 years for the next meeting, so that we actually are aware of what our baseline is in terms of that, and the 65% is performance against that as part of that. Thank you. Councillor Roseboom.
Thank you, Chair. My question is a bit of an extension of what Mayor Mahe was just talking about. We seem to have a significant increase in staff. I'd like to know where we've increased our staff. Which division has had the largest increase in staff and the reason behind it, please?
Yeah, I can answer that. So our vegetation, walkways, arborists, all that sort of stuff was contracted out, has been contracted out for probably well over 2 decades. So I've made a conscious decision about 2 years ago to start bringing those in. So the largest increase in staff numbers is primarily in that area. And so we're talking somewhere in the order of about 115 to 120 staff additional within the last 15 months. We can give you a comprehensive report back. Perhaps, I'm not sure whether it will be to this committee or another committee on that city operations business group, if you wish.
And just a supplementary on that one, and the reason for that was to save money or be more effective, or the contractors weren't doing as the council required?
Yeah, probably a combination of all of those, but we can bring the rationale and the reports that led to that decision being made and the results that it's achieved.
Thank you very much for that. And where are we housing them now?
2 depots, one at the Mount and one in Toriko. I understand you and Councillor Schuler were out there on Friday, I think it may have been, having a look. So,
yeah, we were there for a different reason. Supposed to be a road, I believe. But no, that's fine. That's answered my question in relation to the current annual report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Just bring up my questions. I've just taken some notes. First one's probably not a question really, but I could turn it into one, which is that on page 59, the capital program, it states the capex for the 2024 annual plan 397 million, but the plan itself, which is still as stated on the TCC website, still says 355 million. I'm just trying to understand, is there a reason for that difference?
Partway through the year, we redefined how we report on our operational projects of a capital nature. So those are Toriko West and digital,
part of that.
Yeah,
okay.
Software as a service. So the big difference between those two is just reflecting those that accounting standards require us to treat operationally, but we still loan fund those projects and define them as capital.
Okay. I hadn't quite grasped when it changed. Thank you. Just to clarify, with the support on page 64 of the agenda, I think it is, does the support for Bay venues include that extra 6.8 million loan, or is that a different chunk of money. Actually, I should,
Is this the community grants table again
It's-
with the bay venues
Yeah.
on it?
yeah,
So I can go back and get a definitive answer on this from the right person, but that should be the entire amount that we've paid to bay venues, including capital and operational grants that covers their capital program and renewals.
okay, so that's it. And through the chair, so a similar question for priority one. Does the priority one funding listed there, does it include all forms of payments made by council to that organisation? In other words, any contractors or subcontractors or suppliers related to any of the priority one initiatives?
To my knowledge, and again, we'll confirm, but it's the amount of the grant that's agreed to the annual plan. Anything outside of that, we just need to check if there was anything at all paid.
I'm aware that from a member of the public who got a Lagoima request that there's a very sizable difference between the core grant and the total spend. So it'd be good to get clear on that. Yeah, on page 10 of the draft report, I'm just wondering, I'm struggling to understand why we kind of failed the balanced budget assessment. That I guess I'm still struggling to get to the bottom of this whole balanced budgeting for councils, which is, you know, in a private sector, balanced budgeting seems to have one meaning, and in a council it seems to have a different meaning. So I need to skill myself up. But I noticed that over the last 3 years, operational revenue has gone up by about 46%, OPEX by about 81%. So that shortfall keeps, creeping up. And I would have thought that would be something to sort of highlight in terms of the balanced budget. I'm just wondering if you can explain why that's.
So that the items that Sheree mentioned earlier are the big reasons in there, Tauriko West and digital showing through the OPEX line, but it's funded differently. So we're sort of required by legislation to produce the balanced budget by definition how it's explained. However, there's been quite a lot of change in terms of how these have been treated in past years, not just with us, with others, which mean that does will show those differences quite dramatically in terms of that going forward.
Would it, just through the chair, would it be possible to have a little table or spreadsheet or something which shows what it would have been if we used the old measures and what it is now? Because I think what I'm trying to grasp is, do we have an issue here where there's always a shortfall and it's due to not taking in enough revenue or not cutting our spending enough, or do we have a problem just simply because of accounting transactional stuff?
So another section in the annual report, section 2, which is our year in review, that has a financial highlights section where we bring in more information that we aren't legislatively required to disclose, so it doesn't fit into this prudence section. And we do have a explanation in there around balancing the budget, and we can look to actually put a table in there that kind of pulls out those items as well, makes it a bit more understandable, and put a reference back to the prudence so that it's clear that that's what we're actually referring to when we're talking about a balanced budget.
I think if the chair thinks that's a suitable thing to do, I think that could be quite helpful.
Idea.
Where are we? Page 16 and page 28, it's talking about development contributions. I'm just trying to understand the big drop. We've got sort of a forecast for the next 10 years that's quite different to what the previous years have been. Is that, I mean, I didn't think we'd got to the point where that was the impact in the FY 2024 was because of the developers actually paying up front for Tauriko West. So perhaps if you could explain that.
So probably two things sitting in there. One is at the level of activity, so the number of building consents and subdivisions because of the economic environment has significantly dropped, so that the quantum is lower than we had expected because lower level of activity. And the other is that even in places like Wairaki, where we have the developer agreements, they are putting some of that infrastructure in, which normally we would have put in and then recruit. So it's a mixture of the two things.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Just to follow up on the previous two councillors, or the mayor and councillor who spoke about the earnings bands for personnel. I'm just wanting to clarify that there are 7 staff who are earning 300 to 360,000, and there are so presume that's the general managers, and then we've got 15 staff earning 200 to 220, 9 earning 220 to 260. So all those 16 staff amongst the 32 who are at the I don't know, what do you call them, tier 3? Are they all there? Or another way of wording that, is there anyone who is in those bands who is not in the tier 3?
All could be, but we'd have to confirm that.
I'm aware there are various rumours going around about that, and I thought it'd be quite good just to be very clear about that at some point. Another question on page 32, grants expenditure up 162%. I'm just wondering what the story behind that is.
It'll be that Tauriko West accounting treatment.
Oh, that's, gosh, it's about three of my questions. I need to get my head around that. Page 44, to Tumu. I guess I'm just trying to understand, maybe the easiest way to ask it is I understand that we made a deal in 2006 for 15 years, and then in 2021, we've redone a form of that deal, so it now expires in 2036. Council has a right to receive cash. The vendor has until December 36 to have a buyback. But I'm just trying to get my head around. I said it's got the face value of it, but what did we actually pay, and how much do we get back if the vendor buys it back? I'm trying to sort of get my head around that.
So I don't have the at my fingertips, but this question was asked by the councillors, and it has been put into Stella. So there is a schedule which shows what the original purchase price is, and then we purchased, was originally 2/3 Tauranga City, 1/3 Western Bay. When the renegotiation happened, Tauranga City Council bought out Western Bay's share, so we own effectively 100% of it. And there's a schedule there that shows that sum, and then the annual cumulative interest that gets added on to the principal. So I can re-find you and send you the Stella pathway.
I've got good access to Stella too, so I can have a bit of more of a play. I've sort of been a bit locked out for a little while.
It's all in there. It's
Okay,
in the variation to the contract.
Just a point of clarification, I don't think that buyout has actually been affected at this point.
And then on page 91, it talks about citywide development contributions, or BIFs. And I notice under water supply, that's basically 60% of the total DC development contributions balance seems to be in that line. Can you just clarify how that works?
That's predominantly the Wairaki project. So that's obviously a significant investment that's been made. That's done at a citywide level, a charge at a citywide level. There's not generally a lot of transport investment that happens at a citywide level. That generally tends to be at a local level. So it's generally water and wastewater, which is where the big citywide is.
Thank you. I think the mayor asked some other questions, so that's better.
Thank you, Councillor Crowther. Councillor Correct, would you like to have some questions?
And sure, and it's great hearing the number of questions from the previous councillors, and congratulations, Me Mahe, for your questions. What have I got left? Well, I've got one actually on page 27 relating to the number of rating units. And I see that the rating units is 61,570, and below, I think we should have a little bit more context around the next paragraph below, where it says the separately used or inhabited parts of a rating unit is 69,262. So just for people to understand what the difference is, it's like obviously like retirement villages or multi-unit developments, etc. But when we look at a divisor for the cost of something, would the 69,262 be a better divisor of establishing the impact per dwelling of the cost rather than the 61,570?
We would look to break that down further in terms of coming up with what that would be. So we'd break down the residential units separately to the commercial, recognising that at a median level and a mean level, there's going to be differences between which you use and use the most appropriate for what we're talking about at the time.
Could perhaps look at putting a bit more context and detail into that sort of section would be helpful, I think. Yeah, I've also actually got a few typos and stuff, but I'll send that to you directly. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Carrick. Just in terms of, I guess, a couple of things coming back to you as CEO, Marty, there's some quite significant questions there, I think, in regard to how do we meet our requirement that we are ensuring that it's a readable document, and how do we consult with the people of Tauranga in terms of that. I think it's something we do as a performance committee need to know that the annual report is something that our ratepayers are able to read, and so I think that's a work in progress that we need to look at. I think just from a KPI perspective, good that we're giving the detail, but this is something I don't know from a process perspective, but how do you as the CEO, what's your process to look at KPIs and see them measured and make sure that they are being measured and achieved?
Through you, Madam Chair. So there's two things there. Firstly, the draft report now is a public document, albeit it's not complete. And so I think as a result of today's meeting, we can go out there and have a conversation with our community and seek early feedback on the shape and content and flavour of the annual report. Secondly, in terms of KPIs and the information that you've been provided today, we have a monthly report that comes to management, at which stage we sort of dive down into each of the various measures to try and understand what we are achieving and what we're not achieving and why. And so on a quarterly basis, we report that formally to governance.
Thank you. And then I think I think signalling that with a 25% increase in the payments to employees and 53% of rates revenue on people and consultants, I think that is something that we will need to not only get some feedback or better reporting on, but I think that's something that we need to talk about with the people of Tauranga, because they need to know that. And I think it's something about, from a performance perspective, are the people of Tauranga getting value from the number of people that are being employed with their rates to deliver services to the city. So it's just from a perspective of performance in this committee, those are questions I think that in the work plan with Paul, I think we will be needing to have a look at how we report back on that, not only for us, but for the people of Tauranga. And that was a statement, but I'm the chair, so I'm allowed to do those. Are you happy with that, CEO?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, it may be that our work program changes, which as a result would mean that the resources that we are required to have to deliver on any work program would need to change accordingly. So that's one thing. There's the quantum factor, but then there's also the quality and ensuring that we get stuff right too. So I'm very happy to have that conversation. Or it sounds like it sounds like this is going to be an ongoing conversation, but I guess providing base information initially is a useful start.
Thank you, Marty. So the questions to staff have now finished and we have got a recommendation. Can I ask for a mover and seconder for the recommendation? Thank you, Councillor Crowther. Moved Councillor Crowther, seconded by Councillor Roseboom. Any discussion on the motion?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just probably another opportunity in my ability to make a statement is that what I heard during the election campaign was about affordability, and I mentioned that with the question I asked. So I would really love this council to actually come up with some sort of an affordability index or whatever you'd call it in terms of moving forward as a council. I know the commissioners were very generous in terms of perhaps generous isn't the right term to use, but yeah, so some of the future impact in terms of the ratepayer or impact on the ratepayer probably exceeded what an elected group of individuals would jointly approve. So maybe there is a bit of addressing or recorrection of the 10-year plan, and it's a discussion that we will need to have in terms of do we bring that forward or not. Really just to accommodate other services or projects that will come along in our term, and because I think we've reached capacity, or probably more than reached capacity, have gone over capacity with the ability to pay from our residential ratepayers. I know it certainly helped shifting some of that onto industrial, but boy, that wheels are doing a lot of squeaking at the moment, and we'd have to talk to a large number of industrial, particularly ratepayers out there. And moving forward, if that could be achieved in terms of, coming up with some policy around affordability or some sort of index, I'd be a happy man, because that's something I campaigned on also, and it's on my screen as I speak, to remind me to seek some more prudent limits on rate increases. And if we can achieve that, that would be great. Thank you.
Crowther.
Thank you, Chair. I'd certainly concur with that. It was a very topical issue in the campaign. I bore the brunt of some of that, with people calling me all sorts of names for putting out figures in the public arena about what the projected rates increases were going to be. And so I was quite relieved, not surprised, but relieved that the numbers were precisely what we learned last week from the rates team. So that was reassuring in one way, and that I'd got the numbers right, but it was very non-reassuring in another way, which were that there were a number of candidates who didn't get onto council, who were stating things like, you have to be wrong. It's impossible for rates to go up that much in that time. You're scaremongering. You're a liar. You're despicable. Those were the phrases that were directed to me. There were some less pleasant ones as well. And that was because a number of people thought that I was exaggerating when I said the residential rates, including water, were going to go up to 2.2 times what they were in the 2024 financial year by 2034. And I note that we had another email from the finance team clarifying that it was actually 2.21 times. So I guess I'd rounded down. But of course, that's a big number. So the reason people who were quite gung-ho, if you like, about spending up large on a number of non-essential projects, I think a lot of it was because they doubted the people who were saying those figures in public. But it's a genuine concern, especially, and I'm thinking of a number of people, but particularly Carol Gordon, talking to councils every year about the impacts of an ageing population. And having met a number of people, like all of the elected members on the campaign trail who were struggling to pay the rates now and knowing what was coming. And I think, you know, when the Prime Minister made his comments at LGNZ, I can understand why some councils were probably not impressed, but I thought the comments were quite appropriate for a council like Tauranga, which is really struggling to keep rates affordable and to keep debt down. And, you know, to be looking towards the $3 billion of debt doesn't give me assurance that we're going to be able to do much about the rate. So I strongly support that. I note on paragraph 17 where it makes the comment, 6 out of 9 satisfaction measures sourced from our annual resident survey results were below target, with many trending downwards. And I think that's an area that I hone in on as needing a huge change in terms of the outcomes from this council. There was absolute denial from the commissioners that they were not in tune, you know, with the people of Tauranga. I think the evidence is incredibly clear from independent surveys, from less, you know, not non-randomized surveys, but even from the council's own resident survey, that the commissioners were not delivering what the people of Tauranga want. So I think that's something that I come to this council understanding that it requires a very delicate balance here, that we can't go flip-flopping all around the place over a 10-year plan, but we have to get the balance right. And I don't think the commissioners did. And I'll be interested to see the long-term plan amendment paper that's coming to our next council meeting in that regard. In terms of the consultants, I think it'd be helpful to break down the information into, probably for me, it would be helpful to see it in the transport area where there's significant external funding, well, until the recent times, in the waters area, and then into other areas of the workforce, because I think at the moment I feel like I'm a little bit blind as to how much of that significant issue that the mayor and the chair have both outlined, which is a concern to all of us, how much of that will be resolved if, for instance, we don't get a lot of transport funding, because are these people just, you know, gearing up for delivery of that? Are they in the waters area with all the essential work that needs to be done there? I don't know, but I think we need to get really, really clear on that. And a couple of minor things, I would just suggest to staff, when you come back with the report, it'd be good to have all the tables just going from left to right, in terms of the left being the, you know, oldest date, and then going through in chronological order, because there are a couple, I think, which are going, they sort of reverse that, and I sort of got myself confused for a few seconds. So it'd probably be good just to be consistent on that. And I'd also note the number of rating units for residential and commercial exceeds the total number of rating units, is a statement that's listed in there, but it doesn't seem to be valid for the last few years, including this year. So maybe just make it clear there's like a historical anomaly there, but that's not the case for the last 3 or 4 years. Otherwise, I think people may not fix on that number when it's perfectly, I think the numbers all add up now. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Crowther. Mahe.
I have 2 main comments. Firstly, I would like to see our operational revenue exceed our operational expenses. I think it's important that going forward, if we do want to, you know, we've got to start paying for things and not just borrow to keep the council going. I would also just, you know, I am concerned, I guess, around the increase in employee remuneration. In the last year, we have increased our staff by 9.7%, yet the staff remuneration has gone up 25%, which I think is quite concerning. especially, this needs to be directly linked to our KPIs and what we're delivering for our people. And this doesn't seem to be the case right now, with a number of our KPIs actually going backwards, as Glenn just mentioned. That actually we're not getting the level required yet staff and salaries are going up. So, if that is the case, I want to see that showing that we are starting to deliver, and those people and those salaries are making a difference to the performance of this council. And that sort of goes back to your point, Deputy Mayor Schooler, around delivering and value for money for our people. So that are my two comments. That should be the focus, I think, of this committee going forward, is that we do get that operational revenue larger than our operational expenditure. We've got to figure out what that is, and then our people need to start delivering and be judged directly against KPIs. And these numbers, I think it's a way we get in check, that we're not increasing the salaries of staff, without getting the direct results for our people. So thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Mahe. Councillor Roseboom.
Yeah, mine's probably a continuation from Councillor Kurak and Councillor Crowther in relation to the rates. I understand that the city has to take rates. Last year, when the rates were set and the residential, commercial and industrial rating process was set, in the wider Tauranga area, we were already starting to feel the pinch in the commercial industrial area of a declining market. Things were already starting to go south on us. So at a time when we introduced a new rating window in the industrial at a reasonably significant rate, a lot of the businesses that rate was going to affect were already tightening their belts. And I understand that the valuation reviews are backwards looking. They're done on historic values, not looking forward. I think as a group, as a council, we need to be a little bit more flexible going forward and start to read the future business direction. And if the businesses that are going to be paying the brunt of the rates are about to go into a bit of a commercial downturn, best not hit them with the last rate increase at a time when they're already financially constrained and trying to prioritise hanging on to key staff members to be ready for the uplift, as opposed to having to make a decision about paying rates or laying off staff. It's a touchy subject. It's going to be a delicate way forward through this, but we need to be a little bit more aware of the decisions that we make as a council has on our potential ratepayers in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Roseboom. I think that's a good summary, I think, from each of the councillors and Mayor, and I think probably giving some direction back to staff, and also just, I think, confirming the direction that we in this committee on accountability and performance and finance are wishing to take, and making sure, again, as a number of us has said, talking about getting value for the people of Tauranga. So that being the discussion and debate, I now would like to put the following motion to be voted on, that the Accountability, Performance and Finance Committee receives the report, Tauranga City Council draft annual report, notes that the attachments provided are subject to changes as a result of review and audit and further inclusion of taxation and consolidated accounts, notes that the full financial performance will be reported to the Accountability, Performance and Finance Committee on the 8th of October 2024, notes that a full designed version of the annual report will also be presented to the 8th of October 2024 Accountability, Performance and Finance Committee meeting for further review. All those in favour? Aye. And those against? Thank you. The motion is carried. We now go to 8.5, the final statement of intent 24-25 to 26-27 for the Local Government Funding Agency. I think we've got Paul speaking to this, and we're welcoming Gareth Wallace, Caroline Lim, and Cherie Cobble back again. Welcome.
Sorry, and Caroline Lim.
Just to introduce the paper, statement of intents are required through our CCOs. The other statement of intents were presented under the commission. We have the final statement of intent for the local government funding agency, and I'll just pass over to the team to run through that and any questions.
Sorry, welcome, Catherine, again.
So the draft statement of intent was presented earlier in the year, in February, and there have been some changes in the statement of intent, and they related to information that came to LGFA as a result of the long-term planning process, realising the higher level of capital investment, and also some decisions by the board addressing their capital adequacy. So those are the two main reasons for changes. Overall, you know, I don't know that you want me to go through the detail of the statement of intent, but the impacts on us of the capital adequacy is an increase in the base rates and more retained borrowing with LGFA to improve their capital position. But overall, they are doing extremely well, and their borrowing is expected to grow substantially. It was only a few years ago they had total lending to the sector of about 10 billion, and they're now at over 20, and over the 3 years expecting it to grow significantly. They have cost increases coming because they're some of their cost structures are changing as they lend more, borrow more from the international markets. Yeah, I think that was probably about enough. If there's any questions.
Thank you. Just a quick one. As TCC is one of several shareholders, how many are there, please?
31.
Government is also a shareholder, 20% shareholder.
Any questions from the committee? Another one just on bullet point on page 66, you probably have got a different number. As with previous year, there remains uncertainty about the SOI forecasts relating to the amount of council loans and LGFA bonds outstanding. Is that something that we get reported on so that we have got more certainty?
So LGFA reports quarterly to shareholders. They actually run a very good online report. I'm not sure that elected members have tended to listen to that, and they also do produce a 6-monthly report.
Right. So when's the next quarterly report likely to be?
I think that the next one, actually, because we have a Borrowers' Day, it would be around November. So then there'll be another one around February, March.
It would be good to be informed of that. If it's a webinar that we can join, that would be great. Thank you. And just the point above that, you're comfortable that LGFA proposes to do this, strengthening its financial position by increasing the base on lending margin by 5 basis points?
That seemed the best option for raising additional capital.
Thank you. Any other questions? It being the end of questions, can I have a mover and seconder for this recommendation, please? Thank you, Councillor Courik. Thank you, Mayor Mahe. Any discussion on the motion? That being the case, I now put the following motion to be voted on: that the Accountability, Performance and Finance Committee receives the report. Oh no, wrong one. That the Accountability, Performance and Finance Committee receives the report final statement of intent for 24-25 to 26-27 for the local government funding agency, receives the local government funding agency's final statement of intent 24-25 to 26-27, attachment 1, and the letter to shareholders, attachment 2. All those in favour? Aye. And against? Thank you. The motion is carried. I just am going to suggest, I know we've got lots of questions coming up for the election report, and we have got an extra speaker. Welcome, Warwick. I'm going to suggest a 10-minute adjournment. So we'll come back just before at 11:26. Thank you. Thank you. So the next report is 8.6 election 2024, a report on the 2024 election. I believe Christine Jones and Coral here will speak to this report. And we've also got our guest speaker, Warwick Lamp, welcome. And Kaylee Dunphy.
Yeah.
Give a quick introduction. So purpose of this report is to give an overview of the election process, the vote, the two parts, which is attracting candidates and encouraging voter participation. And it gives a report on the costs spent in the election and the number of candidates and the overall voter turnout. So as you're aware, the council appoints an electoral officer. So that's a statutory position under the legislation. So Warwick is the electoral officer for the Tauranga City Council elections. So he probably do most of the speaking to this. We have run an internal review of the process and how it went, and also keen at some point to get some feedback from elected members from your perspective as candidates, of things that you felt went well and things that could be improved as part of the overall improvement plan for the next election. But I think probably best just to hand it over to Warwick to speak to it.
Thank you, Christine. Madam Chair, Your Worship, councillors, thank you for the opportunity to come along and talk to this report, and keen to take questions and pass on any comments that you think you might like to know about. So, as you see, elections pretty much done and dusted. I was trying to work out this morning how many council elections I've been involved in. I think the first one here was in 2007, when Councillor Currick was on the board, I think, at that time. So I've done all the elections since then, and over my career with council elections, I think I'm up to about 700 or 800 council elections. And the interesting thing is that this is the first one I've done where there was no incumbents involved. So different dynamic that you're all aware of, that return to democracy where no incumbent councillors. And as I mentioned in the report, that created quite a different dynamic of how the election was conducted and was carried out, because there wasn't that dynamic in the media and the community of candidates versus incumbents. So I think that has changed the landscape of how things turned out. So in the grand scheme of things, from the start, council has done a election campaign, and I gather you've seen the campaign overview of all the activities the council did to promote the election. And from my experience in dealing with councils, that campaign was one of the best that I've seen. I think it was a very active campaign, lots of different media, lots of different things involved. And as I've said to council staff in our review, I thought in the grand scheme of things, it was a gold standard of an election campaign, an awareness campaign. Because it really did get the awareness out there of what was happening. From a national media perspective, the election was front and centre. In the local community, there was lots of talk about it, lots of chatter. And I think everybody was aware that the election was on. So as I say, in comparison to what I've seen in other councils, I thought it was a very, very good election campaign. Now, does that translate into voting return? Not always. Voting return this time, 38%, about the same it's always been. It is what it is. Voting return is there are lots of things that affect voting return. It's a multifaceted issue. The election campaign, the awareness campaign is one part of that. The media activity is another part of that. I think this time around, the media perhaps wasn't as well engaged as what I've seen in previous times. I think perhaps that may have been because there was no incumbents involved. And in previous elections, there's always been quite a lot of debate and the noise between those people who are standing and those who are incumbents. Of course, it didn't happen. Turnout, there are lots of things that affect that. And for example, one of them is that the single member wards, I think, had a bit of an effect on how the turnout came out. The reason for that is that the single member wards electors vote for two people around the council table, the ward councillor and the mayor. In the past, it's been 7 people around the table, 4 at large, 2 in the ward and the mayor. So when people look at their voting papers, they had to say of 7 people sitting around this table. The feedback I had this time was that that was just the case of 2 people. So perhaps that had an effect on whether people voted or not. Also in my networks and the people I talked to, I had a lot of feedback to say that the decision to vote and who to vote for was quite hard. Lots of candidates, lots of different candidates, lots of different platforms, lots of choice. Sometimes that means it's hard for people to make their mind up and vote. So perhaps that had effect as well. You put those things in the mix, 38%, to say it's about what it's always been. Those number of votes was about 11% increase in the number of votes we received from 2019. And Council's campaign certainly did a good job of raising the awareness. As far as the election process goes, a couple of things that I thought were a highlight. One was Council's candidate videos. It's the first time that I've seen a council do videos like they did, in the way, in the format that they worked. And so I'll be keen to see what your feedback is about that. But from my perspective, those candidate videos went really, really well. I thought they were a very good format, a very good structure, and they gave candidates the opportunity to say what they wanted to say in a very structured, consistent process. We had, 45,000 views of those candidate videos. So I think that shows that they were well looked at. I've had many of my other councils say to me, gee, I wish we could do those in 2025. So I think there'll be other councils that will copy that format going forward, because it was a really good way of doing things. And of course then, the orange bins, first time that this council had an extensive array of orange bins around the community. Coral's catchphrase was, they're here, there and everywhere. They're in every supermarket. And I think when you look at how that worked, in comparison to the postal system, which we all know is degrading over time. Last time, 2019, we had 11% of the votes came through ballot bins at council premises. And they were only at the libraries and the main council building. This time we had 45 bins at 43 locations. We had 86% of votes returned that came through those bins. So 14% came through the postal network compared to 89% 2019. 4% came through DX blue bins, 10% came through New Zealand Post red bins. So massive change in the return profile. It also does, that change does make it difficult to get a daily comparison of how votes are coming back in, because 2019 postal system, or orange bins with a different time frame, a different profile of how people do that. And of that 86%, 32% of those came through the 6 big supermarkets. Big numbers. So I think that initiative certainly made it a lot easier for people to drop their votes off, and we got them in a much timely manner, and then we're able to produce a result pretty quick on the day, and then for the final result as well. So all in all, when you put those things into the mix, I think that campaign went really well, and there are lots of things, as I say, that affect turnout and how it worked. Even though in saying that, Some of the wards, the turnout was a bit higher than others. The highest one, of course, being Matua Otamotai at 45%. Councillor Crowther, Councillor Crowther's ward. And then Bethlehem soon after that with 43. I think, having observed lots of elections, one thing that does really improve turnout, and I see it in mayoral elections around the country, is when there is a really strong mayoral campaign backed by the media, and there are mayoral candidates going at each other and getting their networks out there, knocking on doors, seeing people, getting people energised, getting people to vote.
Sorry, Warwick, I might ask you to, we're hearing a little bit more of your opinion. Can we just get to the conclusion, please?
Yeah. So the issue is that I think that then affects turnout and how people vote and how we go from there. Okay, so that's pretty much where I'm at. Happy to take some questions and see what your comments are.
Thank you. We're going to start with Councillor Kurek.
Thank you, Warwick. Online voting, in my mind, that's a serious matter that needs to actually go to government for consideration because it seems to be going nowhere. Can you give us a bit of an update of where that's at, please?
Sure. Unfortunately, the answer to that is nowhere, really. Online voting has it's been talked about for many years. There's been some work done to get that underway, but it's got to the point where nothing is happening. And the feedback we get from central government is that GCSB, who look after advice to the government around this stuff, are saying that there are concerns around the security of online voting from a big picture perspective, and that that it hasn't yet got to the point where they are comfortable saying to the powers that be in Parliament that online voting is ready to go. Now, of course, my company, we do lots of online voting, and I disagree with that. I think it is ready to go and has been for a long time. But it does require a parliamentary decision. And so it means the politicians need to be on board with that, because the moment it comes in for local government elections, then by extension, it would happen for parliamentary elections. So everybody's got to be on the same page about that. Having said that, GCSB have recently come to us for the electoral reference group. It's a group I'm on that looks after council elections, and said, we agree it is becoming to the point where it is inevitable that online voting will be the way it will go, and that perhaps time is for some traction to happen on that. So nothing happening at the moment, but I think it will get to the point where there will be online voting, but I can't give a timeframe as to when that might be.
Supplementary would do that. So it's quite startling the number of returns that were returned in the orange bins, which to me indicates the danger of councils approaching the next election in 2025 without orange bins. I'm sure they'll want to copy council given that statistic, but if they don't, because the further we're getting into this online world and people wanting to participate in democracy using their phone or computer, makes the postal option just absolutely redundant. And so it's nice to hear that GBS, what do you call it?
GCSB.
SB, the security people are opening their ears to it. So, but what can we do as a council to promote government to take a more serious look at this? Because ultimately it sits with government. What could we do? Could we get a paper put to us and a letter sent to the Prime Minister, or what do you recommend? Because we seriously need to get this addressed.
I think at a high level, you can support LGNZ, council can support LGNZ to go down that path. You can approach your national MP, you can talk to the Prime Minister. I think you can do the lobbying at the parliamentary level to push online voting and make it easier for people to vote accordingly.
Yeah, LGNZ probably has lesser influence on the Prime Minister at the moment, given the reception he got down there last week. But that would be a good avenue. So yeah, thank you, Warwick, for that suggestion and how we address it. Yeah, it's up to us. Thank you.
Mahe?
Thank you. Sorry, just to come back to your comment, Rick, being at LGNZ and listening to the debate, because I brought up this issue. And there isn't a want to go down this track, mainly because of the security issues raised. And I guess my comment was with blockchain technology now, that's a way around it. I'm interested, question Warwick, because they did mention that they kind of have the system for overseas voters, where you basically they do accept that if you download a copy, fill it out and re-upload it, they're quite happy with that as a system. Is there an option to do that, or you've looked at that?
That's right. You can, as a parliamentary voter, when you're overseas, do as you say, download, complete your voting paper, upload, send it back securely. That process is not in place for council elections. The legislation does not allow that to happen yet. But I understand that DIA and the Justice Department are looking at that to bring it in for local government elections, so that when you are overseas, you can do the same thing. And you're right, by extension, that then means that could well work on a wider scale, because it fits all those requirements and is done in a secure way.
Yeah, just to supplement that, I agree, and it should be another option, I guess. We're trying to find it to make it as easy as possible. I guess my argument on the security is I was walking around letterboxes, putting flyers in letterboxes, and I could have taken as many voting papers as I liked out of those letterboxes and signed them and returned them. So, I find it sort of strange. Obviously, I can't do that from some of our less friendly people in the world, but certainly I don't see the mail system being a fully secure system either.
Thank you, Mayor Mahe. Councillor Roseburn.
Yeah, hi, Warwick. I've just got one question in relation to the Electoral Commission granting TCC access to the electoral data roll. Is that going to give us access to which section of the community is the largest participant in the voting process?
Yes, that data allows us to do demographic stats by age group and gender and ethnicity to some degree, to see what the voting returns and trends are across those demographics. So we will produce those in a short time.
Have a time frame for that?
I need to confirm that with Coral, but I think it'll be in the next few weeks.
So just a supplementary on that, so you can confirm we will get gender as well as age, because I think the report only talks about age and Māori, non-Māori. Gender is quite important.
I do need to check that. I think you're right, it is not gender, but I haven't looked at the data we've got from the Electoral Commission yet, so I can't confirm that.
I would be very surprised if it didn't have gender in there, and we would like to get that, please.
I'll check that.
Thank you. Councillor Carratha? Questions? Yeah, for staff as well as Warwick. Yeah. I've got a few. Oh, yes, we can. Allowed to speak.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to be quiet, but Warwick, STV, quite confusing for a lot of us. I was probably the biggest recipient of that system in the election, and that I won on the 8th iteration, I think it was. What are your thoughts on how that went? As I got quite a bit of feedback, it was confusing to people voting.
Yeah, interesting that you say that. I haven't had that feedback. I got very few calls about STV and how it works, or how it doesn't work. This is the second time it's been used in the Tauranga elections, and in other elections, people have used it, many, many times for DHP elections. And I don't see it as being a cause for concern or confusion, and I don't get that feedback. Council's campaign had plenty of information about how to use STV and how to rank candidates, and I don't think it's an issue at all.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. I guess a supplementary to that, It's in the Ballot did some excellent charts showing how STV voting did influence decisions. So I would encourage that in the next to staff in the next 4 years, as we're building up to the next election, that we actually utilise that data and that visual representation of how the actual results for this election, because I think that was something that was a very good visual reminder, because I didn't have anyone who understood it. So people struggled and they didn't ask questions because they didn't know how to. So just a few questions for me, probably for staff. Previous local body elections and certainly the report from another couple of councils have talked about a low turnout for 26 to 35-year-olds and in Māori. And I just would like to ask, was there particular marketing campaigns designed to get better participation from younger people and in Māori?
Kia ora koutou. Yes, so one of the things that we did with this campaign was to look across the board and to look at some of the data in terms of where are those harder to reach communities from what we know from past elections and voter turnout. And you're absolutely right, some of those younger age groups are really, really tough to engage with and drive up the numbers. So through our digital campaign, I guess we did a couple of things. One was to try and create content that was more engaging for a younger demographic. So we launched an Instagram page and also had, I guess, collateral that was a little bit different for what you would often see on council channels. Then we were also putting paid promotion into targeting demographics and certain harder to reach groups as well. In terms of Māori, we also put in advertising with the likes of Moana Radio and had Te Reo ads, as well as multicultural kind of ethnic targeting ads as well throughout those digital programs.
Thank you. Just in terms of the costs, can I confirm, or can somebody confirm that staff costs and their share of overheads are included in that table of costs?
Yes, I can confirm that includes staff costs. It doesn't include salaries for staff. It just includes overtime payments for things like special voting. So it doesn't include like my salary or the salary of my staff that would work Monday to Friday. If they worked a weekend, they would get paid.
Okay, so I would say that actually doesn't include staff costs other than overtime. Okay.
Yes.
That does probably make quite a difference in terms of the number of people. So the marketing team, those costs would have been included?
No, so we did this all in-house, which probably
they were doing this.
That's right, yeah. But so we haven't timesheeted all of the staff, I guess, hours that they put specifically on this campaign, but we did have a number of our kind of designers and content writers working on this, but that's not kind of allocated on a timesheeted basis.
And so I guess just a comment from me and for this committee, when we do understand the cost of events and activity that are undertaken, we will be looking to say we will need a staff allocation. It mightn't be perfect, it doesn't have to be timesheeted, but going forward, we would like to see a full cost of particular events, because very difficult to understand whether something's effective. Even when we looked at this, I think Mayor Mahe, you did have a cost per vote at some stage, but if you haven't got staff costs in there, then it's difficult to actually say that that's quite right. Just in terms of the number of people that listen to the videos and the number of people who listen to there was a governance podcast reported It would be good to understand when it says a high number of people to have those numbers in the report.
Absolutely. We can speak to the video, kind of how many people logged onto that site, which was, I think, around 48,000 for those videos. That included the candidate videos, but also the STV how to vote video. But we can come back for the podcast as well.
The comments, I had a lot of probably only negative comments about the who would you hire to run your city. And thank you for your comments, Warwick, on the marketing campaign, but I'm not sure is marketing your expertise? Because it's, yeah, that's a question.
No, marketing is not my expertise, but there is an old adage in the marketing world that you succeeded when pushing the boundaries when you get a complaint to the Advertising Standards Authority. And there were a few complaints about that particular wording that you mentioned to the ASA, which shows that it did garner a lot of attention and therefore some comment as a result.
And I'm sadly not thinking 38.9% of is a lot of attention, but in my experience in marketing, then if you're wanting people to vote, that's what you tell people to do across all the channels. And running the city and who would you hire, it was just confusing to the people I talked to and the people in marketing that I consulted with. So I think going forward, we need to really think about if you've got a message and the message is to vote, let's make sure we get a vote word in that messaging statement. Could we please next time make sure we are confirming that the message that we are putting out there is one that is actually the call to action that we actually want. Just having a look at the 2022 Auckland election report, it talked about a survey carried out after the voting, specifically said following our past 2 elections, a survey has been conducted to gather information about people's awareness of the elections, use of council information, and reasons for voting or not voting. Has this been carried out or considered in Tauranga?
No, we haven't done that generally in the past. It's not something that we've got budget for, but if it's something that you thought was valuable.
Well, it's interesting, not something you've got budget for. We don't know what was budgeted. So I think for next time, can we maybe think about what we're spending money on and include a feedback? Because again, what we're hearing, you'll have heard a bit today, is that we do need to get feedback on the events and make sure that feedback is positive. Another question for me, there was a real lack of meet the candidates opportunities for candidates. There seemed to be quite a number. Mayor Mahe and his other mayoral candidates was very busy. The only one I had in my region was organised by a competitor who chaired the Ratepayers Association. Can I ask why TCC doesn't at least stand up those events? Because I did read in Auckland that they do.
Yeah, I can answer that. So meet the candidate events are in the political space. And so that is something that as an electoral officer that I do not recommend councils get involved in. Across all the councils that I work with, none of them do meet the candidate events because they are, as I say, it's in the campaigning political space. They're difficult to organise and it's best that the council remains completely apolitical and not get involved in those things.
And just in terms of, so Auckland obviously doesn't get your advice, maybe you don't do the Auckland election because they do get involved in the meet the candidate. So as we were all, there were no incumbents and there were people that hadn't done this before. I didn't hear it in either of the 30th of April or the next meeting to say, you will have to gather your candidates in your region and organise events. There was no, these council facilities might be available. So it did make it quite uneven in terms of those who already had, I guess, local distributions like my competitor, who was the chair of the Ratepayers Association for the Mount, And in Martin's area, I don't think you did have any meet the candidates because you weren't aware that you had to organise them for yourself. So how would you respond to that as an issue from us, Warwick?
So I was aware that It's in the Ballot group did organise a session in each of the wards, and there were many other community groups that did organise meet the candidate meetings, including ones in Martin's ward as well. So from a council perspective, council advertised all those meetings on its website and made available premises to organisations if they wished to run them. And that's pretty much how it's done across the country. It's standard practice for community groups to arrange their own sessions and their own meetings, and most communities have groups that are well entrenched in doing that are then made known on the council website and given some help if needed for premises to go ahead and run them, but not for councils to be involved in the actual running of those campaign events.
So I guess, a supplementary is that we've got 38% is seen as sort of okay, and it was okay last time, and so we haven't failed because we're just as bad this time. Are comments like we've never supported meet the candidates as an event, you can have an external speaker moderating it, non-political. Don't we have to do things differently if we want a different outcome?
To some degree, but that is getting involved in the political space, which is not something that an electoral officer or a council should be doing. I'd strongly recommend that council does not get into that space because it is just asking for trouble. It is difficult to be even-handed across those things. It's difficult for candidate events to be arranged in a way that gives everybody the opportunity. And it's best for community groups who have interest in each of those wards to do those themselves.
Hi.
Just further to this, I'm just interested, saying council weren't involved, and then there's the candidate evenings of $15,000. So just interested in what that relates to.
Yes, those were the costs that we had for the candidate. The council held candidate information evenings, one in February where we had over about 120 people turn up. So that was hall hire, costs of food, costs of presenters, all of that. All of those costs, advertising, and then we also had Warwick had a candidate information session on the 30th of April. So those two costs relate to those two events. Yeah.
One last question. In terms of significance, actually I've got two. So first one is to the CEO, just in terms of under section 42(2)(DA of the Local Government Act 2002, the Chief Executive is responsible for facilitating and fostering representative and substantial elector participation in elections under the Local Electoral Act 2001. On the basis we got 38.9%. Do you think that's substantial? And on the basis we got 1 woman out of 10, do you think that's representative?
Thank you for the question, Madam Chair. I guess if you look at the trend of voter turnout over the last 25 years, voter turnout has been consistently average within this city, and by comparison, average across the country. I think the campaign and advertising and promotion that went on, not only trying to attract a good pool of candidates, was very successful. And I think the balance and diversity was probably much better than I think we've seen previously in terms of candidates. So it's really up to the voter, though, to come out and vote for who they want to represent them. And I think we're all disappointed. We would have liked to have seen more. But I think you've heard today that there's a range of different factors going into this at the moment that, to a degree, we only have a certain amount of control and influence over. And I think the initiative about the orange bins was, I shudder to think, if we hadn't done the orange bin in the supermarkets, I think we would have seen a very, very poor voter turnout. In terms of one female elected representative, no, that's not balanced. But yeah, that's up to the voters of the city.
And I guess, again, a theme I think is you're going to find from this committee is that just because it was a poor turnout before, it's not an excuse to have a poor turnout again. So I would definitely like to think we're going to start a strategy of more than just the elections, but how do we get our voters in Tauranga on board sooner rather than later, rather than a 6-week campaign to try to get people on board. We're certainly going to want to be able to show that we want them to feel that they are represented by this council, that it's important to them. And so to me, I think this report is very operational. I think it misses some major points about how we do things better next time. And I would definitely like all of the questions that we've had today answered for the next meeting in a different report, much less operational and more on a governance level, answering the question about facilitating and fostering representative and substantial elector participation and what we do differently going forward, starting from now. Are there any other questions? Councillor Currick.
Sorry, your speech was so long, I've forgotten what the question was. So what was that?
Councillor Morris, would you like to interrupt Councillor
Councillor
Currick while
Morris,
he finds his
I'll
question?
find my question.
Thank you for your indulgence, Madam Chair. In terms of the pre-election report, my understanding is that is a requirement under the Act for the Chief Executive to provide. Did the outgoing governance of this organisation view that report or have any feedback into it before it was adopted?
Through the chair, only information. There's no input at a governance level into that report.
Councillor Roseberg. Boom, sorry.
Yeah, I've just got one in relation. I take on board your comment, Warwick, about it being the first election that you've handled that's gone from an appointed commission back to a democratic one. Was also one where we went from predominantly at-large candidates to a total ward system. Now, during my campaign, I had multiple issues around the general public of Tauranga didn't know which ward they were in. So they were attending meetings for other candidates, and then they suddenly got their voting paper and realised that they were at the wrong meeting. So that was one issue that we had. And the other one was when we do the next ward system change amendment based on population and how many councillors we're going to have and how it's done, was there any reason why we chose the middle of the street as the boundary? Because from a media marketing perspective, having the left-hand side of the street in one ward and the right-hand side in a different ward was quite confusing to many in the electorate. So maybe the back boundary fence of a section is probably a better dividing line as opposed to the centre of their street, because my entire electorate I had that right around the boundary. So it was and also my supporters delivering flyers only deliver on the right-hand side of the street, please.
Just
Was problematic. So from the Electoral Commission perspective around going forward, how can we guide where our boundaries go to make it easier from the perspective of advertising to the electorate?
Yeah, that's a decision that's made by council in its representation review, and you will have the opportunity to do that before the next election. And so, it's a case of drawing lines on maps when wards are in play, and sometimes that's difficult to do because of the nature of the city. But you'll have the opportunity to review all that and look at those numbers and determine what might be the best way to do it, and therefore where those lines might go or not go. Not have any, yeah.
And my question, why has Dunedin been doing well in terms of participation?
Sorry, Dunedin? Yeah. Different communities have different ways of doing things, and it's not really a question I can answer. They're STV. They have a very large central ward. So they don't have wards around the city like you have here. But perhaps the community is more engaged with their council. I'm not sure. The media are certainly very active there. I don't know. There's lots of things in play.
So just one last question, Warwick, I thought you talked about strong media presence, but I think during the campaign you talked about it was a very quiet issue election. I felt the media presence and visibility was very small, and I know there's been a restructuring of media, but I heard both sides of that from you. Can you clarify, please?
Yeah, no, I agree. Where I was going with that was that the awareness campaign the council did, my view was that was very, very good. But it requires a strong media coverage to get that extra bit of traction. And I think you're right. The media have been under lots of changes. The whole system's different to what it was. And I didn't see that in this election, that media activity, particularly around the mayoral candidates, was not as high as I've seen before, and certainly not as high as I see in other cities.
Through the chair, can I just add to that we saw, particularly early on, strong national media coverage, but when it came to the local coverage, and then it coinciding with the time of the Bop Times losing journalists, and our local democracy reporter at the time said, it just stretched so thin, so they'd focus on mayoral candidates, but weren't able to focus on the ward candidates. So I guess there is a bit of a difference as well between kind of strong national media interest at the start of the campaigns, but then not as much as we would have liked to have seen in the local coverage.
Just another probably comment, from a process perspective, again, to put visibility, TCC didn't put out a media release at the inauguration because they suggested, I think you suggested, that media were already there, and the photos for that were available on the 16th of August, which was quite a long time after if you're trying to do social. So can we ask, please, that sort of thing when we are trying to promote democracy coming back in Tauranga, that the support of I would have thought a media release and photos is pretty much available live, if we can.
Madam Chair, can I just add one comment about 2028 election or the next elections? There's recently been a change in the election time frame in the legislation, which has extended the voting period from 3 weeks to 4. So going forward, that'll be in the mix around comms campaign and orange bins and all of that stuff. So there will be an opportunity to relook at how all that went and to see what opportunities there are in 2028.
I'm interested to get your comments, Warwick, around, would we likely get a a higher turnout if we actually went back to a polling day and had polling booths, obviously like the general election.
Yeah, that's the eternal question. Polling booths haven't been in play for council elections for a long, long time, since the Act changed in 1989. There was one council that did polling booth elections in 1992, which was Hutt City, and their return was 21%, which was half what it was before that with the postal elections. But the landscape's changed from then till now. Obviously, it's 30 years ago. But that has led us to the place where we are now with having the orange bins around the community. This is the first cycle where they have been far more prevalent than what they have in the past, which is sort of a de facto polling booth because you can take your voting paper to any place that you're doing your business in a far easier way than what you could by finding a post box to put it in. The issue with polling booth voting, though, is that it is it's one day. It's very expensive. It's very manual. There's lots of resource involved in doing that, and it is very, very difficult to do. It would add significant cost to the process. By way of example, Australia do polling booth voting for council elections, and their return out is significantly lower as a result. And the costs are way, way higher for doing that. And I think in this day and age, it doesn't suit the way that we operate to be able to do things on one particular day. We provide that opportunity over the 3 weeks, next time over the 4 weeks, for people to be able to return their vote when it suits them.
Can I? Yes, please, Councillor Schuler.
Thank you, Chair. Just one question around the voter turnout and the tracking of the voting through the days after the voting opened. Is there any particular analysis done on that in terms of where we are and overall numbers compared? And could you see that as an opportunity? You're still staying apolitical and generic to introduce activation calls to action to bring more voters out and let the public know where that's at? Because it was quite an interesting point around the candidates because we were obviously affected by it, but just those two questions. Thank you.
As I mentioned in my opening remarks, a different return profile with the orange bins to what it was with the postal system last time. So, hard to get a handle on comparing apples to apples. But even saying and doing that, council did put out media releases to say what was happening with the return. But we all did think that there would be a much bigger late surge to get it higher than what it was, which didn't eventuate. And so I think, that experience shows us that next time we do need to do more activity during the voting period to push people to, push interest in people to vote earlier than what they did this time.
Any more questions of staff or our guest Warwick? Councillor Curritt.
Thank you. In terms of information for the voters, the booklet is the key document that I think most voters would use when filling out the voting form because it's there with the voting form. And just looking at the content, and I've looked at a number of profile statements by various candidates, and a lot don't actually put anything in there regarding policy, what they stand for, what they want to achieve. Unlike central government elections, a whole lot of the debate or controversy or whatever that gets a lot more interest going in the community is via statements around policy and direction of what they want to achieve. So is it possible to give some guidance to candidates in terms of asking that they put more content in there that's actually based on, rather than a lot of nice words, which actually mean very little, to achieve a bit more policy and outcome driven and, what they want to achieve if they get elected in there. I can't recall, in the process that being sort of sought and, asking candidates to put more policy or direction in there.
So the candidate profile booklets, candidate profiles came in 2001. So prior to that, there was no opportunity for anybody to do anything like that. And when it first came out, the guidance given by electoral officers, and it's the same deal today, is that you have those 150 words to use to talk about yourself, your policies, what you're standing for, and what you're intending to do. And we say that in our candidate handbook, and we talk about it in our instructions to candidates. But it's up to candidates as individuals to determine what they put in the 150 words. And rightly or wrongly, some take the opportunity to say what they're standing for. Some take it to say things about themselves, or how many dogs they've got, or where they live, or those sorts of things. So the opportunity is there for them to do that, and we do provide that advice, but many candidates don't take it up.
That being the end of the questions for staff and for Warwick, can I ask if there is a mover for this motion? That being the case, I would like to move a different motion, if I may, that a new report comes back to the next meeting with answers to the questions raised today. New report rather than further, and take out the A, please. Yep.
We won't be able to have it. The election research report won't be available at the next meeting.
So Coral's just suggesting that the election research, which includes age and gender, will be available for hopefully for the November meeting, not rather than October, which I think is fine. We'd like to have that information.
Still not sure.
You must have gender.
Does it flow logically? So through the chair, you'd be better to say requests that, because otherwise you've got that, the Accountability, Performance and Finance Committee that doesn't flow. Requests that are.
I'm happy to move this motion. Can I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Crowther. I think there are a lot of things that weren't covered in the report, and a lot of questions today. I felt it was a little bit operational as a report, and we would like it more governance, particularly answering those legislative requirements. So I would, so that's why I'm moving this motion. Is there any further discussion on that? Councillor Crowther.
Yeah, I had a few comments. I agree with Warwick that it was unusually quiet, and I think the comment that Kavia made around the media is perhaps, tied in with that. And I note that a controversial campaign like Auckland had doesn't necessarily mean a high turnout either. I think was it 35% that they had. So, controversy is one thing, but policies another. I noticed there was a distinct lack of policy discussion from the vast majority of candidates that I encountered. I went to a lot of mayoral events, to some other ward events. We didn't have many events, as we've heard. So it's in the ballot, had a certain press, a scripted format, which didn't really allow people to share views unless you had luck of the draw with a particular question. So we had one other event, which was good, but it'd be great to have more. I think my view on that is that whilst TCC may not be able to actually put on events and do the whole thing, it could enable events a lot better. And I think that's what I perceive from the chair's comments, that there was a lot of confusion, myself included, around, do we need to be proactive here? Do we need to organise some events? Some of us would have quite happily done that, but then you don't want to be, the candidate who's organising the event, which then, could potentially lead other candidates to sort of do their own thing, and it can become quite controversial. So I think there's a real place for TCC to be educative and enabling in that space. I'd suggest to our chief exec that the low number of female councillors is not just an issue for voters. It's also an issue for the city overall. And it's a responsibility of the council, in my view, to put forward a good representation model that leads to an optimal representation. Now, that doesn't guarantee females are elected, but it does mean there's a better chance. And we've heard the Local Government Commission use that argument to go against especially small single member wards around New Zealand. They've actually said explicitly that they'd encourage larger multi-member wards, saying that it results in more diversity and greater representation of female councillors. So here as a submitter at the time, I was quite closely involved and spoke with them both formally and informally. And they saw TCC as a special case, that it was returning to democracy, to an elected council. In my opinion, and certainly in retrospect, I think it's clear that was a big mistake by them and a big mistake by the council to put forward that system. And the feedback that I had across the campaign was absolutely explicit from candidates within my ward, within other wards, from a lot of the public, and from people who I would say are informed commentators on local government. And that is that we got exactly what we set out to achieve. And I don't understand why we set out to achieve it. That was my concern. I don't think people forgot what elections were about. I think they just got confused by a lot of things. So some of it was the innovative but questionable sort of now hiring, who will you hire adverts. Now, I like the idea of a bit of controversy and a bit of, pushing the limits, but fundamentally, I agree more with the view that was expressed earlier, which was that it's all about an election. So people didn't get the key message, which is vote for people who will deliver the kind of city you want. They sort of conjured up images that we're a bunch of employees who sit around, and that was not helped, in my view, by the meetings put forward by TCC, which was talking constantly about alignment between the executive view, the staff, the councillors and the public, and that everyone needs to get in, behind the mayor who'd got him behind the CE, who got him behind whatever. It was incredibly confusing for a lot of people who understood democracy the way that I see it, which is that a councillor is more like, if you like, in a central government context, we're all political parties of our own. We're elected by people with a certain tendency towards certain ways of thinking or policies or whatever you might want to call it. And we have to work together as a team for sure. But we have to do that in a way that tries to represent a range of views around the city. And to try to have it that we're sort of, conjuring up an image of employees, I think distorts that too much. A good effort, but I think it missed the key point, which is that we need to actually just be really explicit and say, vote for one councillor and a mayor, or if we change the system, whatever that is. Regarding STV, I actually agree with the people who said that the public was incredibly confused. I can see probably the public didn't call you Warwick, I would suggest. So the candidates may not have been as confused, although having said that, I think we'd all could confirm that there was so much variance in what was said by the candidates. So some people said, don't vote for anyone else apart from your preferred candidate, because otherwise you'll take away votes from your preferred candidate. If you give someone else a 2 or a 3, that's it, don't do it. And there was all this messaging on social media. Others were sort of saying the exact opposite, of course, which is that you can't harm your candidate if you give another, a number to another candidate. Excuse me a sec. So that educational side, I think, would have been really helpfully picked up by a more explicit campaign, and that TCC could do. And I think that needed more explicit sort of instructions for the public around that, and less explicit instructions around that you're voting for people, because they kind of knew there was an election, but they just didn't quite know whether it was in their interest to rank certain people down to a lower number. And what else did I have? And in terms of the bins, I think that was critically important. It was a good move. I do worry about sort of them being bins and being next to rubbish and recycling bins, and the sort of the placement, just the sort of the overall logistics of it. I think it would be better. It's not that they need to be literally elevated, but it needs to be somehow a little bit different to just, well, I'm throwing my rubbish away, I'll just sort of throw this in the next bin, which is what it was at some supermarkets. It was different in different supermarkets, but it'd be good to have a bit more, I don't know if you can have control, but certainly a bit more of a guideline around that for those stores. And what was the other thing? I had one other point. That's probably do. I forgot the other point. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Crowther. Mayor Mahe.
Yeah, a couple of things. I think I agree with Glenn on the ward system. I think we need to look at that, whether we have a few wards plus some at large, but I think that would help with that representation, being able to vote for a number of candidates that you want to see be successful. I think a lot of people, they may have been agnostic to the people in their ward, but there were people that they wanted to get onto council, but unfortunately weren't in their ward. I guess a little bit in response to Councillor Currick's around policy. I guess running for council for the first time, I found it very hard to run on policy when you're one of 10 votes around a table. I guess the way I looked at that was running on a vision and saying this is where I want to take the city, but without I guess in the central government context, you run as a party and therefore you can have your policies and people know what you're going to deliver, but it's very hard to get that policy, I guess, across the line as one of 10 votes, and that's just the quirks, I guess, of local government. I think throughout the campaign, I struggled a wee bit being able to get the messaging across. Obviously, there was 15 candidates running for mayor, and there wasn't really any opportunity to debate apart from probably the business chambers. That was the only real debate where we could actually discuss issues against each other and get people's views. But most of those evenings were 1 minute or 2 minutes or 5 minutes, give us your views, but you never really got to discuss the issues. What I found personally very effective was going into businesses and educating them about how important councils are and what they do, and very much that messaging around and the poll, I always ask people who voted in the general election, who voted in the last council election, and it was kind of probably 70-80% had voted in the central election, but 20% voted in the local. And then what I said to them, well, like the planning rules about what can be built around you, the public transport, the roads that you drive on, the parks and amenities that you use on a daily basis, that's all decided by councils. In fact, central government have very little impact on your daily lives unless you've got kids at school or you need to go to the hospital. But in your everyday life, the central government, apart from policy around taxes, etc., has very little effect on your life, but councils do. And I think we could get that education piece across a lot better. And yeah, it's just back to that STV. Again, I think some more education around that. And I did hear candidates say only vote for one. I guess again, my message, I think Glenn just touched on it, is actually your number one candidate doesn't get affected unless they're knocked out. So you don't affect your candidate by voting for more your preferred candidate. And I guess the message I said to people, only vote for people that you want in, but if your candidate gets knocked out and you actually want to have a say in who the next choice is, because otherwise you're basically saying every candidate you don't mind which one they do, and I know a lot of people, there was definitely candidates they didn't want to get in, so I think it's just that education to say, well, vote for 3 or 4 or however many you actually want to get in, and rank them, because that is actually quite important. Otherwise, you're supporting every candidate if you only vote for that one. So, that's something I think we can certainly message better in future elections. That's my, I guess, comments around this. But very much agree. Jen would like to hear from management around, I guess, the lessons they learnt and what and improvements can be made next time to try to get that up. And I understand that it's not hard, but I think we can engage better with our people and so they understand how important it is, and hopefully they want to have their say. But I also believe that us as a council starting to engage with them and them understanding what we're doing through that communication and how their voice can be heard in shaping what we do will hopefully help in that regard of getting them involved to pick who represents them.
Thank you, Mayor Mahe. Councillor Roseboom.
Right, and speaking in support of the current motion, the types of things I'd like to see in the report is wards versus at large, or combinations of. Do you amalgamate 2 into 1, whatever, to get more candidates? Some sort of feedback on that. My personal feedback from the election was the general community in the Taurika ward was split. Some were in favour of wards, some were not. So we need to somehow blend that together. During the induction phase, or the selecting or encouraging people to stand phase, make available or make every candidate very clear what their responsibilities are in around it's your campaign, but make available to them, or make them aware of what's available in the award that they can use, like where are the halls and what the costs are of those halls for them to lease, so they can get some of their campaign staff, if they've got them, to actually reach out and actually do the hall hire. Just let them know, especially for first-time candidates. Designate so they can actually have the ability to host. Those candidates that had a very strong ratepayer affiliation association inside their ward had a far greater opportunity to engage with the general residents in their ward than those that did not. Some wards were very well underrepresented by ratepayer associations, so we need to do something around either encouraging the ratepayers to represent all of Tauranga. They claim to when they're not in an election cycle, so when they're in an election cycle, they can do more to represent all of the Tauranga people and host meetings all around Tauranga, not just in their host ward. Could we also look at designating more hoarding sites if we're going to continue with the ward system? The current hoarding sites that are allocated are fine for a general election, but for a local body one, I think we could do a little bit more around opening up more sites inside each ward. Because the sites that we did have pretty much had to host nearly every candidate's hoarding, and it did get a little bit confusing driving past 20 or 30 signs trying to pick out which one was actually yours. So we could possibly do that. The rest of it will probably take care of itself. Social media, big one. Every ward has a different demographic. Mine was fairly evenly split between over 55 and young families and kids. They live in different spaces. So targeting the whole ward in one social media space isn't going to get the whole ward. So we need to, the over 55 category, still read papers religiously, more focus on newspapers. The young families, busy, active, more social media based. And I know this starts to get expensive, but how we do that will engage better with the general public. Just an option to look at. That got back to my question before to Warwick around boundaries. Trying to allocate a zone to Facebook is quite challenging, and if it takes quite a lead time to set up. In my case, it was almost 3 weeks from the time I engaged. I'm going to do a Facebook campaign to when I actually got it off the ground was nearly 3 weeks, based on the rules, and you have to follow to doing a Facebook account page inside a localised zone for a political campaign. They get quite touchy rules. So making candidates aware of this, that they've got to be well set up well before the campaign period actually starts, would also probably benefit a lot of candidates if they knew what they were in for before they signed the piece of paper. Thank you.
Councillor Roseburn. The debate is finished. I now put the following motion to be voted on, that the Accountability, Performance and Finance Committee requests that a new report be provided to answer questions raised at this meeting, along with the election research report. All those in favour? Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. So, discussion on late items. I don't believe there are any discussions on late items. So I'll now ask Coral to give the closing karakia, please, Coral.
Well, thank you. It's a prayer to finish. Ka whaka haere te tapu, ia watia ai te ara, ki te ruki whakatahatai e, ki te ruki whakatahai e, humi e, hui e, tai ki e. Kia ora.
Thank you. I now declare that this meeting is closed. Thank you all for attending.